Good morning. The screen? Oh, okay, okay. He always puts a blank slide up there. My apologies. This is a terebinth tree, by the way. I don't know if these grow here locally. I don't think you see many of these, but this is a terebinth tree in Israel. And the story that we just read is one that we probably have skimmed over a few times, but not have really thought about it. But I wanted to connect that story to some of the archaeological things that Kim and I have been involved with over the past several years. We've had a couple of people here, the Spillmans and Michael, that have joined us on one of our archaeological digs. But since about 2017-18, we've been digging in Israel at the ancient city of Shiloh. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about a specific area of Shiloh, how it connects to that story, and what that means to us. So this is the ancient tell of Shiloh. It's in the West Bank. It's a fairly large tell that's surrounded by a middle bronze wall. And there is one particular area that I want to show to you in just a moment. But this is of course, it looks kind of stark at the top. Of course, there's been a lot of archaeology that's happened there. But this is the tell. A tell is a layer of civilization that's been laid down over centuries and even thousands of years. But look at the area around it. This is the hills. These are the hills that's not far from Shechem. In fact, Shechem is just a short distance from this location. It's probably maybe 20-minute drive to the to the modern city of Nablus, and that's where Shechem is. Shechem sits right between, of course, two hills. Of course, Mount Gerizim. They're not really mountains, but Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. But this is the dig. This is the dig site, and this specifically is where we've been digging. But Shiloh, of course, is also, before I move from this slide, is where the tabernacle was for 300 years. This was the first worship site, the first place where man was commanded to connect with God through the tabernacle. 300 years is a long time. 300 years is longer than our country is. And that's how long the tabernacle stood, somewhere on this tell. And so where you have a tabernacle or where you have a cultic or religious center, there's always going to be a place where, of course, there would be ceremonial things discarded or removed. Because once they've been consecrated in worship, or once they've been devoted to God, they would be buried, they'd be set aside, and if it was a cultic vessel, if it was any type of pottery, it would be broken before it would be cast into this area, or this pit. This pit, or a cultic dump site, it's not really a dump site, but this cultic area was called a favisa. And there are many favisas that have been found and archaeologically excavated, but this one is very unique, and I want to show you a little bit about this sacred burial site. This is it here. Now, if you could see and follow with me, this is Area D. This is the area of Favisa. Now, as you would be guessing, okay, well, where did the tabernacle sit? Well, what was the tabernacle made of? Well, it was designed to be mobile. And so we don't know exactly where it is, but there have been some recent finds that suggest that later in that 300 years of the tabernacle being here, it may have become permanent at a site. And so there have been some monumental walls that have been found here. And there's actually some very interesting proportions. This 3-to-1 proportion that you see here, the Holy of Holies, the holy place, and then, of course, the courtyard area. This is where, right now, the current hypothesis is with regards to where the tabernacle ended up. And look at the distance between the tabernacle area. The bronze altar would have stood out front. Look at the distance between that and the area D. This is the Favisa, the cultic area. So when they started excavating here, this was excavated back in the 80s and it was resumed in the 2000s. They have found thousands and thousands of bones that have been sacrificed. But in addition to these bones that have been sacrificed, you find a lot of sacred objects, pottery, lots of pottery, but even very precious metals, including gold. And I'm going to show you some of the pieces that we found. But what's interesting is that this pit reminds us that worship was not, of course, just about what we give in worship, because that's what the tabernacle system was about. It was going and giving. But it was also all about what you're willing to let go of. That was the worship of the tabernacle. It wasn't just what you give, but what you're willing to let go. And I think that says a lot. This is part of our team here. And not only, again, were these bones. Now, you can imagine that what would you find in a pit of bones that had been set on the altar? You would find them primarily which side? And we have a zoo archaeologist that's working with us, Dr. Haskfield. And he's a really interesting guy. But he's there looking at all the bones that we dig up. And what he says is that they're mostly all like 99% kosher animals. So we know this was a Israelite worship center. It wasn't Canaanite, because in Canaanite favelas and other areas, you would find non-kosher bones, right? But you would also find, of course, them predominantly being the right side of the animal. Why the right side of the animal? If you remember, that's the priestly side, and that's what that would have been, of course, the side that you would find in this area. So again, you also see these vessels, scarabs, beads, and jewelry. This is a bone. This is Dr. Haskfield. We dug this up. This is a sheep's head, and it actually bore the marks right here. You can see that if you're close. That is basically the markings of an axe, a sharp object. So these are the types of things that we're digging up. And what's so unique is these things that have been found in Area D. This is gold. Finding gold in an archaeological site you would think is common, but it's really uncommon. Really uncommon. And so you find these gold objects that have been put literally on the altar. They have been given up. And that's what's so interesting when you think about what happened here in this sacred site of Shiloh. All these things that had been given up, these precious objects, not only in addition to animals, but these objects like you see here, it makes you think about Genesis chapter 35. And just to remind you what happens in chapter 34, you remember chapter 34, what happens at Shechem. Shechem, of course, was a site. Jacob, of course, is going to build a well there. He's going to occupy some area and land outside of Shechem. There's a king of Shechem, and this king's son, of course, abuses Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. And we remember what happens. Simeon and Levi take issue with this. And they lie to the king of Shechem and the people there. And so, if we're going to make bonds, if we're going to have familial ties, you need to become circumcised. And so this man so loved Dinah that he somehow convinced all of the men of the city to become circumcised. And so while they're healing from that painful procedure, of course, Simeon and Levi, they ransack the city, they destroy it, they kill everyone in the city. And the text specifically says that they took objects from their houses. They looted the city. And then in chapter 35, Jacob's preparing to leave to go to Bethel. Who was it that named Bethel Bethel? It was Jacob. This was going to be a place of consecration. It was going to be a place that he's going to build an altar. So he's taking his family there. But there's one thing that you cannot take with you as we go to this place to worship God. What is it that you cannot take? You can't take the idols of the Canaanites. And what even further, I don't want you to even take the jewelry that was maybe connected to this Canaanite worship area. Don't even take the earrings. It specifically mentions that Jacob had them bury the foreign gods and the earrings. Now, I presume that there was more than just earrings. There was probably necklaces. There was probably other things. Earrings were oftentimes, in ancient times, as nose rings. In fact, the Hebrew word can actually mean either earring or nose ring. But why does Jacob have them bury these things underneath a terebinth tree before they leave to Bethel. Because these things had no place around or a part of the worship of God. And so what I want you to think too is that this Hebrew word, when it says buried there, that means that these idols weren't just temporarily buried. They were buried and they were to never be opened again. They were never to be touched again. This wasn't just this removing of the historical past. It wasn't just some symbolic act. It was a spiritual turning point. And that's what I want you to think about. This is a cultic vessel. It's a chalice, and it's from the late Bronze area. So it's about 15th century BC. And this is actually from an area that I dug. And so you see the bottom part where was the stand. This was a cultic vessel. And it was used in some part of the worship of Yahweh. And once it's used, what happened to it? Once it's been consecrated, it's removed, it's broken, and it's set aside, and it would have been thrown in Area D. Now, another verse that I want you to think about. Where does Joshua chapter 24 happen? It happens in Shechem. It happens at the same place that Jacob had his family bury these things. Follow with me as I read Joshua 24. Now, therefore, this is Joshua in Shechem. He's literally there at probably, again, the city of Shechem, the ancient city of Shechem, that again was between Mount Ebal and Gerizim. You remember, while Joshua's there, he's going to go on Mount Ebal, and he's going to proclaim the curses that will fall upon you if you do not follow the law that Yahweh has given you. And, of course, on Mount Gerizim, he would go up to the top, and he would, from the top of Mount Gerizim, proclaim the blessings that would happen if you follow Yahweh. This is what he says. Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt and serve the Lord. Let me stop there. This is Joshua just having led the children of Israel out of the desert for 40 years. These people who are now in Canaan, now in Shechem, their parents have all died on the other side of the Jordan. And what must have been in their possession? Guess what was in their backpacks? Guess what they were carrying with them? Well, they were carrying with them probably objects that they had maybe taken from other cities that they had been at. Where had they been? Remember, they go to Jericho first, and then they go to Ai, and then they go to Hatzor. Or these objects that they were clearly carrying were from Egypt. They were passed along by their family. Let's continue. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. We stop there sometimes. You can keep reading. He says this. Then put away the foreign gods that are among you and incline your heart to the Lord. And what does he do? And he takes a large stone and sets it up there. Where? Under the terebinth tree that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. Well, what is it about a terebinth tree? Well, it had become a sacred tree. It had become connected to consecration. It had become connected in some way to making a covenant with God. And this is the site where Joshua stood. This was where there was a large temple here. Now, if you move forward into the Judges just a couple hundred years, Abimelech is going to build, and he's going to, of course, kill thousands of his own men. This is, again, when you think about this moment in Joshua, think about this. So you have Jacob here, same site, and you have Joshua calling the people to bury their idols here. And what is he asking them to do? He's asking them to decisively renounce anything that divides their loyalty. Surrender it. Set it aside. Underneath the terebinth tree, this covenant was renewed. The stone that the text tells us that was raised there was a witness to this covenant, to this surrendering of things that they had to give up. This is what this palace would have looked like. This is a rendering of what that palace looked like that Abimelech probably was connected with. And so when you think about some of these objects, this was found actually in Area D. Stacy Tucker, a good friend of mine, Dylan's dad, my daughter's husband's father, was with us when we dug this. And so not far from where Joshua set up the tabernacle, where Joshua was going to establish the tabernacle to be established there in Shiloh, archaeologists, of course, have found these objects in Area D. Bone, and these were pendants. There was actually a silver earring that was found, and many other objects, including personal items like scarabs, beads, ceramic vessels. All of these things were found in Area D at Shiloh. This is another chalice. And in the ancient world, when something was sacred, like a vessel or an object devoted to God, and it was worship, it was offered and worshipped, it was often broken. It would have to be broken after the offering. Now, why is that? So it never could be used as something ordinary again. Why were these vessels broken after they were used? Because they were never to be used as an ordinary object again. In the same way, when we offer ourselves to God, we are no longer for common use. We are to be set aside as broken people, surrendering ourselves to God. All of these things that we're talking about are very much so connected to how we should feel and how we are to be as disciples of Christ. Set aside, broken, and then what? Buried. That's what these objects did. That's what happened to these objects after they were consecrated. They were taken, they were used in worship, they were broken, they were buried, and they were never to be used again in the common sense. And so it makes you think about passages like 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are vessels of glory carrying the light of Christ. And Paul is, I think, reminding us that it's often in our brokenness that God sets us apart. What the world sees as failure, he sees as surrender. And once we've been given to him, once we dedicate ourselves and surrender to him, we are not meant to ever go back to lesser things. Luke chapter 9, verse 23. And he said to all, if anyone should come after him, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever shall save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. When God's people came to worship, they just didn't offer sacrifices. And if you learn anything from this lesson, it wasn't just about what they worshiped or what they sacrificed. It's what they let go of. Now, these objects of gold, these personal items, the necklaces, the earrings, all of those things were given up. Why? Because in some way, shape, or form, they were getting in the way of their devotion and their worship to God. That's why they were given up. Did God command all the Israelites to give all of their wealth and to be sacrificed? No. But anything that facilitated a divided loyalty, that in some way, shape, or form got in the way of proper worship, it was to be destroyed, it was to be buried, it was to never be opened up again. It was to be sealed, just like Jacob commanded his family to do in Shechem. Those things that were given up had value. But once they were given to God, They don't belong to us anymore. Consecration means release, and true worship means that we don't take back what we've given. That's surrender. That's what we're called to do. We are called to come here and worship Yahweh as broken people. As broken. Being willing to let go of what divides our loyalty, to let go what keeps us separated from God. We see that example over and over again. And then what's most interesting is that Romans chapter 6:4, we were buried with him in baptism, so that in order, just as Christ was raised from the dead, we might walk in newness of life. Think about this. In ancient times, as we just mentioned, these vessels that were used and worshipped were in most all cases broken and buried. Now, why were they broken and buried? No, it wasn't because there was anything wrong with that vessel. It was perfectly functional. But because they had been set apart. Once dedicated to sacred use, they were never meant to be returned and used for ordinary events again. So Paul says in Romans that we are buried with Christ through baptism, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead, we might walk in newness of life. We too have to bury the things that keep us from connecting with God. Leave them behind. Leave them centered. So in area D, which I showed you, and you may leave here today and you may forget the term favisa, you may even forget area D, you may forget all those things, but just for a moment I want you to think about area D. Because we all walk through area Ds. Kim and I get a chance to do that every year, and it's a pretty interesting thing. There's lots of other areas that we excavate, but what I want you to do for just a moment is to walk through area D with me, and I want you to reflect on this. Every object that's in area D that's been buried was once precious. The animals, those gold pieces, the earrings, the necklaces, everyone was once precious. Every bone that we found there, every one, was once part of a sacrifice. And every item that has been laid down, everything that's in that pit, everything that's in that favisa was laid down, was a decision. So just like Jacob's household, just like the people in Joshua's day, just like us, the offerings buried there just weren't about ritual, they were about surrender. Following God costs something. And true worship and true discipleship means giving up things, not letting anything come between us and our devotion to God. Remember that Jacob is going to Bethel. He's going to renew the covenant there. He's going to build an altar there. And there's no place for anything that would create a disconnect between them and God. And that's the key message. So here's the question for you as we close. What do you need to bury? Jesus doesn't just call us to partial surrender. And I think somehow we think that that's part of what we do. We just need to give up something, but it's okay to partially surrender something. Following him means death to self, we know that. It means burying the old life, we know that. But just like those bones, those objects that you've seen here in Shiloh, they were offered, they were laid down, and they were never reclaimed. In fact, the first time that they've seen the light of day since about 1500 BC is just, for some items, just a few months ago. What do you need to bury? What part of your life do you need to leave buried underneath a terebinth tree? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 says some things, of course, when we read Hebrews chapter 12, 1, it should make us think about this. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles and run with endurance the race marked out for us. Some things can't go with you when you walk where he walks. And maybe today is the day to lay it down for good. Step into the kind of life that God's been calling you to live all along. Don't let this be you. Maybe the reason that maybe some of the reasons why you feel tired, maybe right now you're feeling tired, and maybe right now you feel stuck or worn out. Maybe some of the reasons why you feel that way, maybe in a funk, is because you're still carrying what God has asked you to lay down. Maybe it's time to drop the weight, bury it, and run free. If this is you, you have an opportunity now to come forward and lay that weight down. Come now as we stand and as we sing.